Welcome to the breakdown where we break down all the messed up shit. Today we are venturing into a film called The Girl Next Door, made in 2007, that is based on a book which itself is loosely based on the real life horrific crime of Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Likens was a young American girl who was brutally beaten, raped, and mutilated by a woman and her kids. You can look up all the details safely on a Wikipedia search, but this movie is basically a loose recount of what happened, but everybody either has different names or are new entirely. So I'll say after watching the movie, the crime itself of Sylvia Likens wasn't entirely simulated in the movie, because if it was, it would easily be the most disturbing movie we would have been talking about so far. With that said, it's time to document what happens in The Girl Next Door movie. Rhea Silva, Peach Cola, Game Silver Dog, Leonie Springs, you asked for it. Here it is. Let's get to the breakdown. The movie starts off with a successful businessman named David walking down Wall Street when he gets a call on his trap phone. He passes by a homeless old man who then immediately gets hit by a car. The driver of the car said "fuck jail." So in order to help, David gives him CPR, which surprisingly saves the man's life. He reveals that if he could switch places with the man, he would, thinking the vehicular pain would numb his own inner pain. He talks about the 1950s, setting up a flashback to an event that involved him doing something bad, particularly to two girls named Meg Laughlin and her sister Susan. We then cut to him when he is young catching some crayfish or crawfish, whatever you call them. Meanwhile, a girl is solid snaking her way behind him, and her name is Meg. She pulls up the sleeves to catch some big ones with her new friend, and David notices a scar on her arm. She says it's from a big accident. This accident she's talking about killed both her parents and made her sister Susan part disabled. Well, Meg has to get back, but if it wasn't obvious already, David is really feeling her. Back at home, David goes to his friend's house named Donnie, who is the cousin of Meg. Meg and her sister are staying with Donnie and his brothers and their aunt Ruth. David, Donnie, and the neighborhood kids all group up to then play some special game. In the woods, the oldest of the kids ties this neighborhood girl up so she can't see, and they play a seemingly cool game where she collects apples and throws them at people hiding. Well, then, I don't know, she gets captured, I guess, and then they ask her some extremely vulgar questions involving sexual experiences, like if she ever played with snakes this big before. Well, later we see the carnival is in town, and Meg made sure to go for a night of fun. David asks if she wants to ride in the Ferris wheel, which she accepts. On the ride, they talk about the accident that took her parents and hurt her sister, but gladly it's not stopping her from keeping her smile. Once the ride is over, she wants a repeat, but her aunt Ruth wants her back home. The next day comes quick, because here is Ruth, who lets her sons and their friends smoke and drink beer. In this first encounter, she talks to her sons, Donnie, Willie, and Ralphie, and their friend David about her old memories of the hoochie coo at the carnival, which are just dancing women. She gets ready to take them to the carnival for its last night and calls out to Meg, who runs up looking a bit scared and bug-eyed. She tells Meg to stay here to look after her sister and also to stay out of the icebox so she won't get fat, especially if she wants to be a hoochie coo dancer. This rude comment has David worrying about her. Then we see the boys in a tent outside looking at Playboy magazines. They also say a mean comment about Meg, which helps support the fact that David is probably the only one who truly cares about her. They then go peeking into the windows to see some girls undressing. I'm thinking this is Meg, but she shuts the lights off. They then wonder if maybe she could play the game. Well, the next day, Ruth assembles the boys to help tear down some silk that's all up in the trees, with Meg in the back looking kinda sad. She burns down one of those cringy silk nests, but Meg says she doesn't want to help tear down them nasty things. And Ruth says in response,
"No, I just don't want to."
Well, I'll be damned. Meg's squeamish. And Meg here's a lady. Why, sure she is. So what in the name of Jesus do you think that makes me?
No, I just
You better
thought...
damn well say no to me. Because I don't need that kind of insinuation coming from a kid can't even wipe her own face clean.
Ruth says that her boys will handle it instead. Then we see David looking clean and getting himself a burger. Then out of nowhere, Meg stops him asking if he can lend her money. Why? Because she hasn't eaten in 2 days. Okay, pause. Why do I get teary-eyed from this, but I can just watch a movie like Cannibal Holocaust like it's nothing? Well, David buys another burger and lets her eat his. She says she can't eat because Ruth won't let her get fat. She says that Ruth hates her and that she's being singled out all the time for the most minor things. It strongly bothers her how much Ruth treats her and won't let her do anything, including her favorite activity of painting. Through David's encouraging words, she gains the strength to endure further and to paint some pictures. Later, when David is working on a lawnmower, he hears Ruth telling Susan to toughen up. Even though she is damn near disabled, she calls her a stupid little shit for dropping laundry. Meg then drops by David's house to deliver a watercolor painting and runs away just as quick. Then David goes over to Ruth's house, meeting the angelic Susan. His intentions are to give the watercolor painting to Ruth and say it's a present from Meg, who stands there looking scared. Ruth looks at it, but she says she doesn't want it because it was meant for him. She then sneak disses Meg by calling her a whore behind the scenes and calling David's father a womanizer. Ruth is a woman who doesn't like women, telling Meg she's gonna end up to be a
Slut, honey. Do you know what a slut is? Do you, Susan? Oh, of course not. You're too young. Anyone who's a slut deserves a thrashing.
The ambience of the movie definitely changed during this scene. At night, David wakes up hearing a heated argument between Ruth and Meg. They are arguing possibly about her admiration for David. The next day, David comes over to her house, seeing Willie, Donnie, and Ralphie tickle the mess out of Meg. When Ralphie touches her titty, she punches him. The other boys then call her the B word multiple times, and Ralphie goes to tell Ruth. They then pull Susan, who was hiding in the closet for some reason. Ruth comes in, all on the boys' side, and tells Susan she should have tried to stop her sister from hitting Ralphie, and since she didn't, she is guilty too. But keep in mind that she can barely fucking walk. As punishment for doing nothing, she puts Susan on the side of the bed and starts spanking her bare bottom. Meg comes in for her sister, but is held down by the boys. She then steals Meg's ring. That was her mother's. I know David's young and all, but now is the time to tell mom and dad back home. Also, these kids know this abuse isn't right, because a couple days later, Donnie and David see Meg talking to a police officer about the beating. Well, later, David gets out of the house to see Meg and Susan sitting fearful and absorbed. Willie then walks in and slaps Meg for bringing a cop around. Looks like the cop didn't think it was too serious though, and Ruth completely terrifies the two girls, making them know that no cop or man will save them. She then sends them to their room so she can reflect on punishment. Well, later at dinner, David wants to sleep over at Aunt Ruth's house, and maybe he wants to help out any way he can. At night, David sneaks into Aunt Ruth's house, going down into the basement, but sees Ruth and the boys in front of a bound, gagged, and blinded Meg. Turns out they are playing the game with Meg, which is basically force her to answer vulgar questions. She has a gag in her mouth, but unfairly, since she won't confess to the stuff she hasn't done before like sex or anything, they take all the books from under her feet. Struggling to stand, her only voice of reason is given by David, but the boys relish in the fact that they have permission to do this. Willie then goes up and threatens her with a knife. He then completely removes all her clothes and then takes her gag off so she can answer their vulgar questions. Questions like how she plays with herself and the such. She asks if David and Susan are here, who are the only ones with some empathy. Ruth tells the thirsty boys to not touch someone like Meg, who is dirty and whorish. They put the dirty gag back in, and then Ruth tells her it could be her little sister here hanging. She is saying either confess your slut experiences or Susan gets the turn. Then we see all the boys who can't sleep. Willie wonders what it feels like to be bound like Meg, and so in curiosity, they go to see how Meg is doing. They give her some much needed water and promise to loosen her up if she lets them touch her. David then loosens her ropes and leaves before Ruth wakes back up. Later we see Ruth trying to feed Meg, but Meg is so dehydrated that any attempt at eating will cause her to choke. Meg can barely raise her voice or hold this cup of tea, and Ruth knocks it away in anger. Blaming Meg for the mess, she gets the boys to hold her down and gets Susan to beat her as punishment for Meg's mistakes. Well, suddenly, David wakes up, but that wasn't a nightmare. In the morning, David then rides on his bike to get back to Grove Street. Well, really is to go help his dad at work, which is the opportunity David takes to ask his dad if it's okay to hit girls. Dad says hell no, basically, and it's best to never hit anybody unless it's all you got left. Then we see sweet little Susan building a puzzle. David comes in and tells her that he can't make them stop, but would if he could. They then hear some noises from Meg. David goes downstairs and sees all the neighbor kids bullying Meg and treating her less than human. David then gets out of his hiding spot to see what he can do to help. But get this, guys, Ruth somehow knows instant transmission. Either that or she was trained in stealth by Sam Fisher himself. Well, later that night, David goes into his parents' room to tell his mom, but she was having too good of a dream to listen. Well, later we see the family torture Meg again, including cutting her around her stomach. Ruth burns the wounds by sticking cigarettes in the wounds. Suddenly, the doorbell rings and Ruth sends the boys to answer. In an attempt to get her to leave, David tells her to not let the boys handle it and offers to watch her. But Ruth says if one sound is made, David and Meg will die. Well, the person at the door was a police officer who does that stereotypical suspicious walk around a guilty person's home who keeps acting innocent. Downstairs, David whispers to Meg that tonight has to be the night that she escapes and just come back for Susan later. Upstairs, the officer says he got reports of Meg being abused, but Ruth successfully gets the officer to not believe those facts. Later, David comes back to sneak a flashlight. He suspensefully walks down the stairs as the suspicious Ruth listens. He makes a break for it when the phone rings. David tries to untie the heavily bruised, dehydrated, and hungry Meg and gives her some money. She rejects the money because it could get her in trouble. So instead, he gives her a small blade just in case and departs to see if she can escape. David then goes to the house and Donnie tells him to close that door. Downstairs, Ruth, the neighborhood kids, and Susan watch as Meg is raped by Willie. Ruth says that's all she's good for when the act is finished. They basically force David to watch, and Ruth tells a mentally broken Susan wanting her mom to shut the fuck up. Ruth then asks who wants to rape her next. Donnie offers to, but Ruth says no, because it would be like incest to rape her with her brother's semen inside of her. Everybody else wants to cut her, putting a message on her so people know she's a whore. Ruth heats up a bobby pin as everybody holds back David. Ruth then takes that heated bobby pin and writes the words "I fuck" before abruptly cutting away. The deed is over now, and Ruth smiles as Meg's body is mutilated so she can't ever get a man. We see the message itself, and Ruth says that Meg ain't done with her punishment. Next, Ruth wants to remove her clitoris to also remove any pleasure she could ever get. David then runs away, but is easily caught and tied up to witness Ruth mutilate Meg's vagina with a blowtorch. David must have passed out because he then wakes back up in the basement. He gets himself loose and goes to see Meg, who is having the life pulled away from her but is still alive. Susan then asks David if he hates her, and obviously he says of course not, but she says he should. Susan says it's all her fault this happened because Meg did try to escape the previous night. Meg definitely did not want to leave her sister because Susan herself was being molested by Ruth to the point that there was bleeding. Meg then finally wakes up, barely able to utter any word, but it hurts. To help get them out, David starts a fire in the basement. When Ruth comes down to see, David knocks her out with Susan's crutches and then kills Ruth with some nasty sounding hits before getting tackled by Donnie. Willie then comes to beat David and holds a knife to his neck, but right before he cuts, the police show up clutch. They take the boys away and the officer finds out what happened from a scarred and sad David. The officer carries Susan away, and David lays next to a dying Meg to hear her last words. Meg asks him if he can get her mother's ring back from that demon on the floor, which David yanks off. Then, after some more words expressing her confusion on how anybody could do this to another person, she passes on. Well, with that sad recap over, we cut back to the present as David mourns the memory of Meg. The movie ends as David walks to where he used to collect crayfish, recounting that Meg taught him something. That is what you do last that counts. Well, yes, it was clearly a disturbing film, but it should hit that it was a movie reflected from real life. Even though these movies are messed up, I am a firm believer that real life can be even more disturbing. Now that we've seen The Girl Next Door, let's talk about the most disturbing moment and most enjoyed moment in that spooky stuff. So back when I had a series called Night Shorts, which is a series where I just talked about big crimes, I was gonna make a video about Sylvia Likens because it is truly a disturbing crime that just speaks evil. If I were to name one crime that was probably more disturbing than this one, it would be the similar murder of Junko Furuta. In fact, the man who authored the Mai-chan or Mai-chan's daily life manga also made a manga about the Junko Furuta crime, and let me tell you guys, nothing has ever shocked me more than that manga. Okay. Anyway, the most disturbing moment of this movie is probably the scene of the branding. The rape is a close second, but the branding pushes you up close to a girl suffering to where you just had to turn away. Gladly though, they did not show the blowtorch mutilation. The most enjoyed moment is hard to pick because we don't see lots of good things happening, but I'd say it was all the times David and Meg were together. I just wish Meg could have kept that smile more. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure you click that like button and check out these film selections here to see similar stories to this one. Thanks for watching. Spooky out.